The radios died first, and that was the part nobody noticed until it was too late. I was standing 40 feet from the reviewing stand on Constitution Avenue between 7th and 9th, when my earpiece went from a steady wash of channel chatter to nothing, not static. Static would have been something. Static would have meant interference, a weak signal, a frequency stepped on by a passing truck radio. This was the absence of all of that, a clean drop, like a wire cut with shears. I'd worked crowd security for 11 years, 4 of them on federal events, and I knew the difference between a dead battery and a jammed frequency, the way a mechanic knows the difference between a flat tire and a seized engine. A dead battery dies slow, the volume sliding down over an hour, while you keep meaning to swap it. A jam crashes in with noise. This was neither. This was somebody, somewhere I couldn't see, deciding the conversation was over. I tapped the earpiece. I rolled the volume wheel on the radio clip to my chest all the way up, and got nothing for my trouble but the faint hiss of my own blood in my ears. The little green light on the unit was still lit, which meant the radio had power and thought it was working. It was listening to a channel that no longer existed. The parade kept moving. That was the strange thing, the thing my mind kept snagging on. A high school marching band from Ohio rounded the corner near the National Archives. Brass catching the morning sun in hard white flashes, the drum line keeping a tight military cadence, and 100,000 people clapped along to it like the world wasn't quietly tilting under them. The float behind the band was a papier-mâché bald eagle the size of a delivery van, mounted on a flatbed truck that crept along at walking pace. And I remember thinking, with the part of my brain that wasn't yet afraid, that it was absurd, almost insulting, that the last normal thing I would ever see clearly was a giant fake bird wobbling on its rivets every time the truck hit a seam in the asphalt. Then a woman near the curb screamed, and it wasn't the happy kind. You learn the difference at these events. There's a scream a teenage girl makes when a celebrity waves at her. And there's a scream a mother makes when she loses sight of her kid for 3 seconds. And then there's a third kind, lower, torn from somewhere underneath the throat, that the body keeps in reserve for the moments it actually believes it is going to die. This was the third kind. I felt it in my teeth before I understood it in my head. I keyed my dead mic out of pure habit, said my call sign to no one, to the green light that thought it was working. And somewhere behind the archives, a metal barricade went over with a sound like a dropped filing cabinet. All that steel hitting pavement at once, and the clapping started to change shape. It didn't stop. That's the part people get wrong when they imagine it. It didn't stop all at once. It frayed. It came apart in patches, a hole of silence opening here, a knot of shouting there. The band still playing on top of all of it, until the whole sound of the avenue was a fabric pulling its own threads loose. Before I take you all the way into that morning, I want to say thank you to everyone who keeps coming back for these stories. And welcome if this is your first time here. If grounded survival stories like this one are your thing, subscribe, leave a comment, and stay with me. It genuinely helps the channel keep going. Now, let me get back to Constitution Avenue, because that scream was only the first one, and the morning had a great deal more it intended to take from us. My name is Daniel Reyes. I was 47 that summer, a contract security supervisor for the firm the city brought in to handle overflow crowd control during the big federal holidays. I'm not a cop. I want that clear from the very start, because a lot of what went wrong that day went wrong, precisely because the people who could make real decisions were never the people standing in the crowd. I had a radio, a high-visibility vest the color of a traffic cone, a laminated badge on a retractable reel clipped to my belt, and a job that amounted to telling families They couldn't cross a rope line. On a normal 4th, that's the whole job. Smile, point, repeat. Find the lost kid. Talk down the drunk. Watch the heat take down an old man who didn't drink enough water, and wave the medics over. I'd done it for years. I was good at the boring version of it, which is the only version that's supposed to exist. I'd done the morning briefing in a parking structure 2 blocks north at 6 a.m. with about 60 other contractors, all of us in the same orange vests, holding the same paper cups of bad coffee, half of us still blinking the sleep out of our eyes under the fluorescent tubes. The concrete still held the nights cool, and the whole structure smelled of motor oil and damp. The federal people ran their own briefings somewhere we weren't invited to, in some room with better coffee and worse news, and we never saw the inside of it. Ours was simple. The supervisor, a heavy-set, perpetually tired man named Boyd, who'd been running these crews longer than I'd been alive, stood on the hood of a city van with a clipboard and told us to stay at our posts, keep the lanes clear, report anything unusual up the chain, and do not, under any circumstances, engage. He said the word unusual the way you'd say it about a lost wallet. He meant a fistfight, a fainter, a kid climbing a lamppost. That's how all 60 of us heard it, because that's all the word had ever meant. None of us were thinking about anything bigger. The threat boards that week had been quiet, Boyd said, and we believed him because there was no reason not to. The weather was clear. It was going to be brutal by noon, 90 plus with the humidity that makes the air feel like a wet towel against your face. And that heat was supposed to be our biggest enemy. We talked about water stations. We talked about shade. We did not talk about anything that bites. My post was the stretch of Constitution between 7th and 9th on the north side, where the public packed in behind steel bike rack barricades to watch the procession roll past toward the Capitol. I had 4 people under me. Marisol Vega, who was 26, worked the west end of my section, and she was sharper than anyone in that parking structure had given her credit for, the kind of person whose eyes never quite stopped moving across a crowd, reading it, the way I'd learned to over a decade, and she'd somehow learned in 2 years. A kid named Tyler Brandt, barely 20, with a fresh haircut and a habit of standing too straight like he was still half in the JROTC he'd just aged out of, worked the middle with me. And 2 others anchored the east end, near the gap where the parade route funneled past us. Greer, a 40-year-old former Army logistics sergeant, square and solid, with a laugh you could hear across a block. And a quiet older man everyone just called Pop, 60 if he was a day, who'd worked more of these events than the rest of us combined, and moved with the unhurried economy of a man who'd long ago stopped wasting motion. By 9, the crowd was already 5 and 6 deep against the barricades. And by 9:30, you couldn't have pushed a shopping cart through that mass of people if your life depended on it. I keep coming back to that detail, the shopping cart, because later it would, almost literally, and the cart would not move. The density built the way it always does, slow then sudden. First there's room to walk the lane, then there's a wall of backs. Then the wall is 2 and 3 people thick, and the latecomers are pressing in behind them, craning for a view. And somewhere in there, the crowd stops being a collection of individuals and becomes a single body with its own weight and its own current. And the job of a man in an orange vest stops being to direct it and becomes only to suggest things to it and hope. The first thing that was wrong, before the radios, was the smell. I caught it around 9:45, drifting from the east, riding underneath the ordinary carnival reek of the crowd, the funnel cake and the sunscreen, and the hot asphalt, and the particular sweat and deodorant fog that 100,000 bodies make in July. It was a hospital smell. Sharp, chemical, the back of the throat catching on it, the kind you get from a spilled industrial cleaner. But underneath the chemical, there was something else. Something rotten that the chemical was trying and failing to cover. the way an air freshener fails to hide what it's been sprayed over. I figured a porta-john had tipped somewhere downwind, or a sewer line had backed up in the heat, which happens, the old infrastructure under that part of the district sweating and groaning when the temperature climbs. I made a mental note to mention it if anyone asked. Nobody asked. That was the second thing that was wrong, though I didn't recognize it as part of a pattern yet. The chain of command had gone quiet, maybe 20 minutes before my radio died completely. The routine traffic I was used to half hearing all morning, the steady drip of copy and post-check and all units hold your lines, had thinned out, gone sparse, and then stopped. And I had let myself believe everyone upstream was just busy with the procession. I'd built that small, comfortable lie without even noticing I was laying the bricks. When the earpiece went fully dead, I pulled my phone from my back pocket. 1 bar, then no bars, then a little spinning circle next to the signal icon that turned and never resolved into anything at all. I held it up over my head the way everyone does, as if 8 more inches of altitude would find the tower. 100,000 phones inside a half-mile box will choke a cell network on an ordinary day. Everyone texting and posting and calling their kids, so I told myself that was all it was. I put the phone away. I told myself a lot of things in those first few minutes, and I told them to myself calmly, in the patient internal voice of a man who has handled every problem the job has ever thrown at him. That voice would keep talking for another 4 or 5 minutes before the morning shut it up for good. Then the scream. The third kind. It came from the east, from Pop and Greer's End, near the Gap. A woman's voice first, high and tearing, the sound climbing past anything a voice should be able to do. And then a man's voice underneath it. Lower, shouting words I couldn't make out. And then the particular ugly churn of a crowd that has just registered something is wrong, but doesn't yet know what. That low collective murmur that rolls outward like a stone dropped in water. The people nearest me turn their heads toward it. That synchronized animal swivel, all of them reading the same change in the air at the same instant. The marching band kept playing, oblivious. The brass and the drums sealed inside their own wall of noise, because a band in full cadence can't hear anything but itself. I started moving east along the inside of the barricade line, which was the only clear lane I had. A strip maybe 4 feet wide between the cold steel of the bike racks and the curb, the strip that was supposed to stay empty so people like me could move along it. I told Tyler to hold the middle and keep people back, and I saw him plant his feet and put his arms out and start saying the words, "Sir, ma'am, please stay behind the line," in a voice that was working hard to sound like it belonged to someone older. I didn't run. I want to be honest about that because it matters to what came after. I walked fast with one hand raised, palm out, doing the thing you do, the calming thing, the thing that says I'm in charge, and this is fine, even when you don't know yet whether either of those is true. In 11 years, the answer at the end of a walk like this had always been the same small handful of things. A fist fight to break up, a fainter to catch, a kid who'd climbed something he shouldn't have. My whole body still believed in those answers. My body was walking toward the old world, while my eyes were about to arrive in the new one. I got maybe 60 feet before I saw Greer. He was on the ground inside the barricade line, on the clean side, the side that's supposed to be empty, the side I was walking up. He had his forearm pressed hard against his chest, and there was blood coming through his fingers in a steady dark line, not pumping but flowing, soaking the cuff of his shirt and dripping off his elbow onto the gray pavement in fat black coins. And he was looking up at a man who stood over him, swaying, the slow, unbalanced sway of a drunk on the deck of a boat, weight rolling from one foot to the other with no rhythm to it. The man's mouth hung open. There was blood on his chin, dark and smeared down into his collar. And even from 20 feet I could see it wasn't all Greer's, because the man's own lower lip was torn, hanging, and he didn't seem to feel it. A wound like that, you cradle it, you wince. Your whole face organizes itself around the pain. His face wasn't organized around anything. It was the eyes. I've replayed his eyes 1,000 times in the years since, in the dark, when I can't sleep, and I still can't make them into anything I recognize. They weren't angry. Anger has a focus, a target, a person it's aimed at. His eyes had the flat, wide, searching quality of an animal that has lost the part of itself that recognizes other things as anything but meat. They moved, but they didn't see the way. Seeing implies a someone behind the eyes doing it. They scanned, they hunted, and there was no person home behind them at all. Just the hunting, running on a body that hadn't yet been told it was supposed to be a corpse. Pop was on his knees beside Greer, trying to drag him back by the collar with both hands, hauling and shouting at the man to get down, get down, get down, his old voice cracking with the effort, and the man turned toward the sound of Pop's voice. He turned the way a compass needle turns toward north, slow and inevitable, and without any decision in it, the whole body pivoting to aim the open mouth at the source of the noise. And he lunged. I'd like to tell you I did something heroic and trained and clean. What I actually did was grab the nearest object my hand fell on, which happened to be a folded spare barricade leaning against the others, 6 feet of welded steel tube, and I swung it like a man swinging a fence post. It caught the man across the shoulders and the back of the neck and put him down flat on the pavement, and the impact ran up my arms into my teeth. And even then he didn't cry out. He didn't grunt. He didn't curl up. He just started getting back up, slow and patient, planting one palm and then the other, like a man who'd merely tripped over a curb and was a little embarrassed about it. That patience was the most frightening thing I had ever seen in a human face, more than the blood, more than the torn lip. Pain stops people. Fear stops people. He had neither. And so there was nothing in him that could be made to stop except the thing itself. Pop got Greer up onto his feet, half carrying him, and the 3 of us moved west, away from the swaying man, back toward Tyler and the middle of my section. Greer's legs were working, but his head was already wrong, lolling, his eyes not quite tracking. And I told myself it was shock, that he'd lost blood and gone into shock, because that was a thing I knew, a thing the old world had a name and a treatment for. And as we backed away, I finally let my eyes travel past the man on the ground, east toward the gap where the parade route funneled through, and I saw that he was not the only one. There were maybe a dozen of them in the gap, where the procession fed past, and more pushing in behind. They moved through the packed crowd, not by shoving but by latching, by grabbing the nearest person and pulling them in. And the crowd's own density, the thing that an hour ago had felt so festive and so safe. The press of strangers all there for the same happy reason, now turned into the trap that killed them. People couldn't run. There was nowhere on this earth for the front row to run to. 5 deep against a steel barricade means the person at the front is pinned by the 4 behind them, and those 4 are pinned by the 4 behind them, all the way back. And a scream travels through that packed mass faster than any single body inside it can move its own feet. The infected didn't have to be fast. The crowd had already done the hard part for them, had packed itself shoulder to shoulder into a place with no exits, had made of itself a single, helpless animal too big to flee. I have spent a long time trying to find words for the sound of 100,000 people understanding the same terrible thing at the same time, and I have never managed it. The closest I can get is that it stopped being many sounds. All the individual screams and shouts, and the names being called, and the children crying. All of it fused, the way 1,000 voices in a stadium fuse into a single roar. Except this roar had no joy underneath it. Only a vast, low animal terror with a high thread of true agony running through the top of it. And the band, God help them, kept playing for another 10 or 15 seconds underneath all of it. The brass and the drums marching bravely along until the band too reached the edge of its own bubble of noise and came apart, instrument by instrument, the cadence stumbling and falling silent, a trumpet hanging on one cracked note a half-second longer than the rest before it quit. That was when the lockdown started. Not a person somewhere deciding it in the heat of the moment. A system, waking up, doing exactly what it had been built to do. All along Constitution, the vehicle barriers that the federal teams use to seal a route, the heavy hydraulic wedges that rise up out of the roadbed to stop a truck cold, came up. I heard them go before I understood what I was hearing. A series of deep mechanical thunks rolling east to west down the avenue, like a row of dominoes laid by a giant. Each one a slab of reinforced steel ramming up out of its slot in the street and locking into the vertical. And, at the same instant, the side street barricades, the ones manned by uniformed officers at every cross street, the gaps that were our only way off the avenue, didn't open. They held. I watched a wave of people surge toward the mouth of 8th Street, hundreds of them flowing toward the one visible gap. And I watched the officers on that line not move, not part, not wave anyone through, their faces set behind their riot shields. And I understood in a single cold drop that went all the way down, through the soles of my boots, into the pavement, that the lockdown was not protecting us from something outside. It was sealing us in with what was already on the avenue. Later, I'd learned the protocol that did that. And learning it didn't make it sit any easier. A mass casualty biological event detected inside a secured perimeter triggers an automatic containment posture. The route seals itself. Nothing comes in, nothing goes out, until a designated decision authority manually lifts it. It is a reasonable rule, written by reasonable, careful people in a quiet room, far from any avenue. And it was about to kill a great many of us, because the thing it was built to contain was already on the inside of the box, with the 100,000 people it was built to protect. The wall went up around the disease, and the disease was standing in the crowd. I got Greer, Pop, and Tyler back to the base of the reviewing stand. A sturdy scaffold structure of steel poles and bolted platforms with a skirt of plywood and red, white, and blue bunting stapled around the bottom. The bunting hung limp in the heat. We pressed in against the plywood in the narrow shadow it threw, in a pocket of relative calm, while 20 feet away, the avenue tore itself apart. Marisol fought her way to us from the west end a minute later, white-knuckled and breathing hard, and she had a teenage girl with her, maybe 16, in a sundress with a sunflower print, who'd been separated from her family in the surge and who Marisol had simply grabbed and dragged out of the current on instinct. 6 of us then, in a pocket of shadow under the stand, while the country celebrated itself into a slaughterhouse all around. Greer's forearm was bad. The bite had taken a chunk of meat out of the meat of the muscle, a ragged crescent, and it was bleeding more than I liked. The kind of bleeding that doesn't slow down on its own. Marisol had a small first aid kit on her belt, the standard issue, the kind that is mostly Band-Aids and good intentions. And she went to work on it fast and competent, packing the wound with a whole roll of gauze and then wrapping it tight around and around, with every inch of medical tape in the pouch, while Pop knelt and held pressure with both hands above the elbow. Greer was gray now, properly gray, the color of wet newspaper, and he was sweating in sheets, and he was very, very quiet, which was the most unlike him of anything, because Greer was never quiet. I told myself it was shock and blood loss. I didn't yet know what a bite meant. None of us did, kneeling there in the shade. That ignorance was a mercy, and it wouldn't last the hour. "We need to get off the street," Marisol said. She had her back flat against the plywood skirt, and her eyes were doing the thing, sweeping, cataloging. The same thing mine were doing without my permission. "These barricades won't hold. Look at them. They're already going down at the east end." She was right, and I'd already seen it. The steel bike rack barricades that separated the public from the cleared route were never built to stop a crowd. They were built to suggest a line, a polite fiction that people honored out of habit and good manners, an inch and a half of painted tube that meant please rather than no. Under the weight of 100,000 bodies in full panic, that fiction was collapsing. The barricades were folding, going flat, the people behind them spilling out over them onto the cleared route. And the infected were spilling out in the same wave, carried along in it, mixed into it, so that the disease was metastasizing in real time, getting bigger and faster every minute. The cleared route that had been our one open space, now filling with the same churning horror as everything else. I looked up at the reviewing stand looming over us. It had a covered VIP section near the top, a kind of glassed box, and a switchback set of steel stairs running up the back. From up there, I'd be able to see the whole avenue at once, find the seams, find a way out. But up there was also exposed on every side, and the structure was already groaning and shuddering as people swarmed onto its lower platforms to climb up out of the crowd. And I could feel it through my hand where I touched the plywood, the whole stand shivering with their weight. It would become a death trap the moment too many people had the same idea, and they already had it. "The archives," Pop said. He'd shifted Greer's weight onto Marisol and stood, and he was looking east across the route, his old eyes narrowed against the sun. "National Archives building, across the street east side of 7th. It's stone, granite, 2 feet thick. Got those big bronze doors on the Constitution Avenue side, tall as a house. If we can get inside, we pull the doors and we're behind real walls. None of these things are getting through bronze and granite." It was a good thought. The Archives building is a fortress dressed up as a temple. All granite columns and bronze, and the kind of solidity they don't build anymore. Built to outlast every soft modern thing around it. But it was across the route, across the river of panic and the things moving inside it. And the route was now the worst place on the avenue to be. "How do we cross?" Tyler asked. His voice cracked clean in half on the second word, and I watched him hate himself for it. He was 20, and he was holding together better than most 20-year-olds would. Better than I'd have bet at 6 that morning. But I could see exactly what it was costing him. The way his jaw kept working and his hands kept opening and closing on nothing. I looked at the route. I looked at the things moving in it, their slow latching progress through the packed crowd. And I started doing the cold arithmetic that would govern the rest of that day. The math of distance and bodies and time and cover. The math where every answer came out written in people. "Not across," I said. "Along. We move along the inside of the stand, west to east, behind the structure where it's covered, and we cross at the corner where the float jammed. The Eagle float. It stuck sideways at 7th. The barriers came up and pinned it across the route. That flatbed gives us a wall the whole width of the street. The infected can't move fast through a jam any better than we can. We use the float." It wasn't a good plan. It was the least bad plan. which is the only kind you ever get in those situations, the kind you choose not because it's safe, but because everything else is worse. Marisol looked at it, ran it through whatever fast machine lived behind her eyes, and nodded once. Tight. Here's something I still think about, and I'd genuinely like to know what you'd have done in my place. We had a wounded man slowing us down, a man we'd worked beside for years, and the cleanest, fastest version of that plan didn't include him. Crossing a jammed parade route on the back of a wrecked float with a man who can barely stand is not how you'd draw it up if you were drawing it up to live. And every one of us, kneeling there, knew it, and not one of us said it, because there are things you don't say even when everyone has already thought them. Would you have made the same call we made? Hold that thought. It comes due later, and the price was set right there in the shade of the stand, the moment I decided we'd carry him. We moved. The reviewing stand ran most of the length of the block, and the gap between its back legs and the plywood skirt gave us a low, dark tunnel, 3 feet high at the most, less in places where cross-bracing dropped down. We went in on hands and knees, dragging Greer between us. Pop took one side and I took the other, and we hauled him along by his belt and his good arm. Marisol went on point with the length of broken barricade she'd taken up as a club. The girl, whose name we learned was Anita, right behind her. And Tyler brought up the rear, twisting back every few feet to check the dark behind us, with his eyes wide and white. The ground under the stand was a foul carpet of trodden trash, dropped programs gone gray with boot prints, crushed water bottles, spilled popcorn. And once, my knee came down on a child's single sneaker, small, blue, with a cartoon character on the toe, and I had to set it aside and keep crawling. Through the gaps in the plywood, the avenue strobed past in slices, legs and falling bodies and a strip of bright noon sky, and once, terribly, a stroller lying on its side in the open with its wheels still slowly spinning. And I made myself not look to see whether it was empty. It took us 6 or 7 minutes to crawl that block, dragging a grown man through 3-foot clearance, and they were the longest minutes of my life up to that point, which only tells you how little I yet understood about how long that day intended to get. My knees were raw. My back screamed where I'd had to hunch under the bracing. Greer had stopped helping at all. Somewhere in the middle of that crawl, his good arm had gone slack in my grip, and he'd become pure dead weight, breathing in long, wet pulls. And I told myself, again, shock, blood loss, the old words, the safe words. We came out at the east end of the stand into chaos, but a different texture of chaos. Here the crowd had thinned, because here the crowd had already broken and run or already been caught. What was left was a scatter of stunned, stalled people, standing in the open like sleepwalkers. And the things moving among them with their patient, latching hunger. And over it all, the great wreck of the Eagle float jammed sideways across the route exactly where I'd hoped it would be, at 7th Street, its crumpled papier-mâché wing crushed up against a risen steel vehicle barrier, the flatbed making a chest-high wall of welded diamond plate we could put our backs to. I want to describe the float, because it mattered, and because I have never once been able to stop seeing it. The Eagle's head had come off in the collision and rolled away into the street, and it lay there on its side in the middle of everything. This enormous, absurd cartoon bird's head the size of a sofa. One painted yellow eye open and staring straight up at the sky, the beak gaping. The whole thing so ridiculous and so out of place in the middle of a massacre that the contrast of it broke something loose in my chest that I had to physically shove back down, swallow, because we had 30 yards of open route to cross and no time at all for the thing that was trying to come up out of me. We used the flatbed as a wall and a road. Pop and I lifted Greer up onto the bed first, heaving him up by the armpits, while Marisol vaulted up onto the diamond plate and grabbed his collar to haul. And then Tyler and I pushed from below and got him over. And Anita scrambled up after like a cat, all elbows and bare knees. And then we were all of us up on the bed of the truck, above the killing floor, moving east along the length of the float, with the bronze doors of the National Archives growing larger and closer on the far side of the street. And that was the moment I looked down, into the narrow shadowed gap between the flatbed and the curb, and saw the woman. She was pressed flat against the side of the float, tucked into that gap, out of the flow. And she had a federal credential on a lanyard around her neck, the laminated kind with the colored band that means access. And she was clutching a ruggedized tablet to her chest, with both arms wrapped around it. She was alive, and she was lucid, which by itself set her apart from nearly everything else on that route. And she was looking up at me with an expression I had never seen on a human face before, and have only seen a few times since. It wasn't fear exactly. Fear has motion in it, a flinch, a plea. This was past fear. It was the still, level look of someone who knows something so large and so bad that the fear has already burned all the way through and left only the knowing behind, banked and cold. "Don't go in the archives," she said. Her voice was perfectly even, pitched to carry just to me under the noise. "It's a designated shelter point. They'll have opened it in the first minutes. It's full." I stopped on the flatbed with my hand already out to help her up, my body still running the old program where you reach down for the person who needs it. "Full of people," I said. "Good. People are good. That's exactly what we—" "It's a shelter point," she said again, slower, flatter. The way you'd explain a hard thing to a child you didn't have time to be gentle with. "Which means everyone who got bitten on this end of the avenue ran straight for it in the first 5 minutes, before anyone knew what a bite meant. They got there first. They're inside. And those doors are designed to lock from the outside, to keep a panicking crowd from being crushed to death against them. So the doors are shut, and the building is sealed. And there are 400 people in that rotunda right now. And most of them are turning. I have replayed this moment more than almost any other, more than the float, more than the corridor that came later. Because she was the first person all day who knew more than I did. And she was handing it to me freely in the middle of hell. And the only reason she was handing it to me freely was that she needed something from me in exchange, and was too proud, or too smart, or too far past fear to ask for it outright. I could see the tablet. I could see the federal band on the lanyard. I understood, the way you understand a thing the half-second before the words for it arrive, that this woman was connected to the quiet that had come over my radio before the world fell apart, that she was part of the machine that had sealed us all in. "Who are you?" I said. It wasn't quite a question. "Reach down and pull me up, and I'll tell you everything on the other side," she said. "Or leave me here and go find out what's waiting behind those bronze doors for yourself. Your choice. But you've got about 40 seconds before that group at 6th notices the float and starts this way. And after that, the choice makes itself." I looked east toward 6th. She was right. There was a knot of them down there, half a dozen at least. And they were oriented our way, beginning to drift. She had been right about everything so far, in the span of 1 minute. And that was its own kind of warning. Because in a disaster, the only people who are right about everything are the ones who saw it coming before it came. I reached down and pulled her up. Her name was Dr. Eleanor Vance, and she was an epidemiologist on detail to the federal interagency cell that ran biological threat response for major national events. She gave me this in clipped fragments as we got down off the float on the east side and pressed ourselves into the recessed granite doorway of an office building on 7th, just south of the avenue, out of the worst of the flow. The archives loomed behind us, vast and serene and indifferent. And now that I knew what to listen for, I could hear it. A muffled, layered, multi-throated moaning was leaking out from inside that magnificent stone building. Seeping through the seams of those great bronze doors, the sound of a crowd that had stopped being a crowd and become something that all made the same sound at once. "The lockdown," I said. "The barriers, the side streets. That was you." "That was a protocol," Vance said. "I executed it. There's a difference between those two things, but I won't insult you by pretending the difference means anything to you standing here." She was catching her breath, and she pressed her free palm flat against the cool granite of the building, like she needed to confirm that something in the world was still solid. The containment posture exists because the only alternative is worse. If this gets off Constitution Avenue and down into the metro tunnels, and out from there to the rest of the city, you are not looking at one bad day on one street. You are looking at the end of the district as a place where people live. The barriers buy time. They hold the thing in one box long enough for a hard perimeter to be stood up outside the box. That's the entire logic of it. I don't expect you to like it. I don't much like it myself. "There are children on that avenue," Pop said. He'd been listening with his jaw set hard, and his voice came out low and dangerous in a way I hadn't heard from him all morning. "You sealed children in with those things. I just crawled over a kid's shoe." "Yes," Vance said. She didn't flinch from it, and I'll give her that then and always. Whatever else she did not lie to make herself more comfortable, not to us and not to herself. And if I'd left the route open, there would be children turning in every neighborhood in this city by nightfall. I made the math choice. "You're a security man," she said, turning to me. "You've already made math choices today. I saw you make one getting onto that float. Don't stand there and pretend you haven't." She looked directly at Greer when she said it, at his gray face and his bound and seeping arm. And Greer, propped against the granite, swaying, lifted his head and looked back at her. And I understood that she had clocked his arm the instant she came up off the flatbed, had read it, and filed it before she'd finished standing. "He's bitten," she said. "Flat. Diagnostic, the way you'd note a temperature." "How long ago?" 20 minutes, Marisol said. "Maybe 25. Hard to know exactly." Vance nodded slowly, and something complicated moved across her face and was gone. "Then you have a decision coming, and not much time left to make it. The incubation in this one is fast. Faster than anything I've ever seen, faster than anything in any literature. From bite to turn, on the avenue today, I'm seeing 20 to 40 minutes. He's at the edge of that window right now." The recessed doorway went very quiet. Just the muffled moan of the archives behind us and the roar of the dying avenue out front. Greer lifted his head again, fully this time. He'd heard. Of course he'd heard. He was 3 feet away. "I'm not turning," he said. But the words came out with a slur sanded into them that hadn't been there 10 minutes before, the consonants going soft, and his good hand was trembling visibly where it hung against his thigh. And every one of us heard the lie in it, including the man saying it. I watched the knowing arrive in his own eyes, the moment he heard his own voice and understood what it meant. I want to tell you what kind of man Greer was, because what he did next doesn't make sense otherwise. He was a 40-year-old former Army logistics sergeant who'd taken this boring contract job because it had steady hours and a real pension track. And he had 2 kids in middle school out in Hyattsville, a boy and a girl, and he carried their school pictures in his wallet behind his ID. And would show you if you so much as glanced his way. He was the man on the crew who remembered every single birthday, who organized the card, who paid for the cake out of his own pocket and waved off the collection, He was not a dramatic man. He was the steadiest man I knew. So when he reached over with his trembling good hand and closed it around my wrist, his grip still strong, and said very quietly, with a slur thick in it now, "Daniel, don't let me do to your people what that thing did to me." I knew exactly what he meant, and I knew exactly what he was asking. And I knew with total certainty that I did not have it in me to do it. "We've got time," I said, which was a coward's answer, and we both knew it was, and he let me have it anyway, which was the last gift he gave me. "Vance, is there a window? An antiviral? A treatment? Anything they're holding back?" "There's nothing," she said. "There is no treatment. There's no protocol for the bitten except isolation and containment, full stop. I'm sorry. I'm telling you the truth because if I don't, you'll spend people you can't afford to spend trying to save someone who can't be saved. And then you'll lose them too." That was the moment the day stopped being about escape and started being about cost. Up until then I had believed, the way a man believes in the ground under his feet, that if I was only smart enough and fast enough and steady enough, I could get my people off that avenue alive. All of them, all 5, and now the girl, and now Vance. That had been the working assumption I'd carried through the tunnel, under the stand, and across the back of the Eagle float. Vance had just quietly, surgically killed it, and I felt the death of it land somewhere under my sternum. A cold, settling weight. The assumption I'd been standing on, dropping out from under me. We couldn't go into the archives. The archives was 400 turning people behind locked bronze. We couldn't go back across the route. The route was filling. The side streets were sealed by risen barriers and held by lines of officers who, Vance told us, had standing orders to let no living soul through the containment perimeter regardless of circumstance, on pain of being treated as a containment breach themselves, which on this protocol meant being fired on. Those officers were as trapped by the rules as we were. They just happened to be standing on the dry side of the line, holding it, knowing what they were holding. "Then where?" I said. "You designed this box. You tell me where the seams are." Vance looked at me for a long moment, and I watched her decide, behind those banked eyes, whether to trust us or to use us. And to this day, I'm not certain which way she landed, or whether for her the two had become the same thing. "There's a relay point," she said. "Not a way out, a way down. A federal continuity node under the federal triangle, accessed from the basement of this building behind us. Every secured event has one within the perimeter. It's a hardened communications and decision room, shielded on its own independent power, with a sealed tunnel connection into the wider continuity of government network under the district. It's where the decision authority is supposed to sit during an event like this and run it. It's where I came up from an hour ago, before I came up onto that route and saw with my own eyes what the protocol was about to do." "Then why'd you leave it?" Marisol asked, sharp, suspicious, and right to be. Vance's jaw worked. "Because the decision authority in that room invoked the lockdown, which is defensible, and then invoked something else, which is not. And I didn't agree. And rather than sit in a sealed room and let it happen on a set of screens, I came up to see the avenue with my own eyes before I let them do the thing they're about to do to this city." She paused, listened, and the level voice finally caught, just slightly, on the next words. "They're about to do something to everyone inside this perimeter that you need to understand. And the only place left to stop it, or to survive it, is back down in that room. Which means I need you to help me get back into the exact room I just ran out of." So that was where we were going. Down, not out, into the box at the very center of the box, toward a room full of the people who had sealed us all in, to stop something Vance still hadn't named. Because she was a careful woman, and she was choosing her moment. If you had told me at 6 that morning, in the cool of that parking structure with the bad coffee going cold in my hand, that the safest move available to me by noon would be to go deeper into the federal machine that was strangling the avenue, I'd have laughed in your face. I wasn't laughing now. And I want to know honestly what you would have done holding that choice in your hands. Because I'm still not sure we chose right, down into the relay node, toward the people who'd lock the door, or take our chances on the surface scratching for a seam in a perimeter built by men who don't build seams. Tell me, we chose down. The building behind us was a federal office annex, glass and concrete, the kind nobody looks at twice. Vance had a credential that opened a service door off the loading dock on the alley side, away from the avenue, and she swiped it, and the lock clunked green, and we slipped in one at a time. Pop and I were carrying Greer fully now, his arms over our shoulders, his feet dragging, because his legs had stopped reliably answering him somewhere in the last few minutes. The door sucked shut behind the last of us with a pneumatic sigh, and the roar of the dying avenue dropped instantly to a muffled pressure against the glass, the way the ocean goes quiet when you step inside a beach house. And the sudden relative silence was almost worse than the noise. Inside, it was dim and cool, and wrong in the specific way that empty buildings are wrong on a day they should be full. The lobby had been abandoned mid-task. A security desk with a half-drunk paper cup of coffee, the cream still skinned over on top of it. A desk phone off the hook, the dial tone long since timed out into the slow warning beep, beep, beep that a phone makes when it's been left that way too long. A metal detector arch still humming its small electronic hum to itself in the middle of the floor, scanning nobody. The building had been evacuated, or its people had run for the archive shelter point like everyone else, and met whatever met them there. And either way, it was ours now. All those dim, empty corridors, all that conditioned air. Vance led us toward a service elevator at the back. But the elevator was dead, locked out, the call button unlit, killed by the same containment posture that had sealed the avenue and the side streets and everything else. So we took the stairs down instead, 4 flights into the basement. And with every flight the air got cooler, and that hospital chemical smell came back, the one I'd caught on the avenue, stronger now, rising up the stairwell to meet us. Vance noticed me noticing it. She didn't slow down, but I saw her free hand tighten on the cold steel handrail until the knuckles stood up. Decontamination foam, she said. It cycles automatically when the node senses a breach somewhere in the tunnel system, floods the affected sections. If you can smell it this strong, up here, it means the tunnels have been compromised. Somewhere down there, something got through where nothing should get through. She kept descending, one flight the next. It's not supposed to be possible, she added, more to herself than to us. The basement door led us out into a long mechanical corridor, pipes and bundled conduit running along the ceiling, the walls bare painted block. The building had dropped to backup power, so the only light came from emergency fixtures, hard red, throwing everything into a flat crimson glare with black shadows pooled in every recess. And the red turned all our faces into masks. At the far end of that long corridor stood a vault door. Not a figure of speech, an actual vault door, circular, a great wheel of brushed steel set into a reinforced frame, with a keypad and a card reader beside it, and a small armored window of layered glass set at head height. This was the entrance to the relay node, the box inside the box. The window was the problem. There was a face in it. It was a man's face, pressed flat to the inside of the glass, the nose mashed sideways. And for a single foolish second, I thought he was looking out at us. A survivor, sealed in, desperate. Then I saw the eyes. They had the flat, wide, searching quality I had already learned to recognize on the avenue, the eyes that scan and hunt and have no one home behind them. And his open mouth was working soundlessly against the glass, leaving smeared streaks of something dark. And behind him, in the red light bleeding through from the room, I could see more movement, more shapes shifting in the dimness inside the most sealed room in the city. Vance stopped dead in the middle of the corridor. The blood ran out of her face so fast and so completely that even in the red light, I could see her go gray. "No," she said very quietly. No, that room is sealed. It's the single most sealed room in this entire city. There's no way in. How is there anything in there?" And behind us, between Pop and me, where we'd set him gently against the corridor wall to rest, Greer made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was a wet, rattling, drawn-out intake of breath, a sound with no human shape to it at all. And his weight changed against my shoulder. It went, in the space of 1 second, from the slack, heavy lean of a sick man to the gathered, coiled tension of a thing about to move. I turned my head, and I looked into his face, and Greer was not there. The thing that had taken 20 to 40 minutes to climb up out of that bite on his arm had finished its climb, and it was looking past me at the side of Pop's neck, with the flat, patient certainty I had seen on the avenue. The compass needle finding north. Everything after that happened in about 4 seconds, and I have stretched those 4 seconds out across years of bad nights, examining each frame of them. I shoved, both hands flat into Greer's chest, all my weight thrown behind it, and he went back off our shoulders and slammed into the corridor wall, and Pop staggered free, off balance, going down on one knee. Marisol was already moving, the steel strut coming up off her shoulder, and Anita was screaming, that high, pure 16-year-old scream. And Tyler grabbed her around the waist and hauled her backward toward the stairwell. Greer came off the wall fast, faster than the man on the avenue had moved, faster than anything should move, coming off an impact like that. And that single fact told me something terrible about how the infection accelerated as it matured, how the thing got quicker the longer it ran the body. And he came straight for the nearest warm living thing, which was me. I had nothing in my hands. I got my forearm up under his chin and his jaw, hard, locking my elbow, the only thing between his teeth and my throat. And we went down together onto the cold concrete, his weight on top of me, and his strength was wrong, fundamentally wrong, the strength of something that has stopped spending any of itself on tomorrow, that has thrown its entire body into right now with nothing held in reserve. I felt my arm begin to give. I felt my elbow start to fold. His face came down toward mine 1 inch, 2 inches, the torn, slurring mouth working. And I smelled that hospital and rot smell coming off him directly now, off a man who'd shown me his kids' school photos 100 times. Then Marisol hit him across the back of the skull with a steel strut, a full swing, both hands, and then again, harder, and the second one did it. Greer, who had remembered everyone's birthday, who had 2 kids in Hyattsville, went still on top of me, all at once, the wrong strength draining out of him in an instant, and his full dead weight pressed down on my chest. And I lay there, underneath the body of a man I'd worked beside for years, and I could not make my arms push him off. Not for a long moment, because pushing him off would make it true, would move it from the place where it was still happening into the place where it had happened, and could never unhappen. Pop did it for me. He came over on his knees and rolled Greer aside, gently, both hands, the way you'd move someone you didn't want to wake. And then he reached out and closed Greer's eyes with 2 fingers drawing the lids down, and he held them there a second. And he didn't say anything, and none of us said anything, because there was not a word in any language for the thing that had just happened on that concrete in the red light. And we all knew there wasn't, so we didn't go looking for one. The face in the vault window watched all of it without any change of expression at all. It had no expression to change. When I could stand, I stood. My arm was shaking, and there was a long red mark down it where I'd been holding off his jaw. But the skin wasn't broken. I checked twice, the way you check a thing you cannot afford to be wrong about. Vance was pressed back against the opposite wall, her tablet hugged to her chest. And she wasn't looking at Greer at all. She was staring down the corridor at the vault window, at the shapes inside the most sealed room in the district. And she was doing math behind her eyes. Terrible, fast, visible math. They didn't come in from the corridor, she said. The corridor was clean until we came down it. Nothing came up these stairs, which means they got into that room through the tunnel, which means the breach is the tunnel network itself, which is what the foam smell is, the system flooding a compromised section. And if the node has been breached through the tunnel, then the thing I came up here to stop. She broke off, pressed her lips together, started over, controlled again. I need to tell you what they're going to do, now, because in a few minutes, you're going to have to help me decide whether to let them do it, and you can't decide that blind. We pulled back down the corridor, away from the vault window and the face in it, away from Greer's body, which we had to leave where it lay, to a recessed alcove where a gray electrical panel was set into the wall, and we could put our backs to something solid and see in both directions. Tyler had his arm around Anita, who had stopped screaming and started to shake, a fine, continuous, full-body tremor, which was worse. And he was murmuring something to her that I couldn't hear. The same few words over and over. Pop crouched against the wall with his forearms across his knees and his hands hanging down between them, looking at nothing. Looking at the middle distance where Greer still was. We had been 6 strangers thrown together 90 minutes ago. And now we were something else, fused by the thing in the corridor that we were never going to talk about. Vance set her tablet flat on the ledge of the electrical panel and woke it with a press of her thumb. The screen lit, and it was a schematic, a network map of the tunnel system under the Federal Triangle, color-coded in blue and green and yellow, clean and precise, the work of careful people in a quiet room. And a whole cluster of the tunnels near the center of the map were flashing a slow, steady red. The continuity network down here connects a dozen federal nodes, she said, and her finger traced the lines as she spoke. Decision rooms, communications hubs, shelter cells, all of them linked by hardened tunnels so that the government can keep functioning during an attack, so the lights stay on and the orders keep flowing even if the surface is gone. The relay node behind that vault door is the local hub for this perimeter. It's where I was working when the avenue went bad, watching the first reports come in. She tapped the flashing red cluster. An hour ago, when those first reports started coming, the decision authority in that room, the senior official who holds containment authority for the district during a federal event, invoked the full protocol. Seal the route, that's the barriers you saw. Stand up the perimeter, that's the officers on the side streets. And then he invoked the next stage, which is the part I came up to look at the avenue before I'd let happen. Which is what? I said. My voice came out flat. I already half knew, the way you know the shape of a thing in the dark before your hand reaches it. Sterilization, Vance said. She let the word sit in the red light for a second before she went on. The protocol has a final option for a biological containment failure inside a sealed perimeter. If the decision authority determines that the contained population cannot be saved, and that the threat cannot reliably be held at the perimeter, the protocol authorizes neutralizing the entire contained zone before the threat can breach outward. In plain terms, that means a thermobaric ordnance package delivered to the sealed area to incinerate everything inside the perimeter. Everything. The infected and the healthy alike. There's no way to sort them, so it doesn't try. It was written for a scenario where the only alternative on the table was the loss of an entire region, an entire population, a choice between a city and a country. She looked up from the tablet, straight at me. He invoked it. The countdown was already running before I came up out of that room. That is why I came up. I needed to see for myself whether the avenue was truly lost, whether there were truly no people left to save, before I would let anyone burn 100,000 of them off the surface of the city. And while I was up there seeing it, the node got breached. And now I cannot get back into the one room where the decision lives. I looked down the corridor at the vault window, at the face still pressed to the glass, and the cold arithmetic I'd been running all day reorganized itself in one motion into a single, hard fact. The countdown to incinerate the entire sealed zone, all of it, the avenue, the archives, this building, us, was running inside a room that was now full of the infected, which meant nobody living was in there to stop it, which meant, unless we did something, it was simply going to happen, on schedule, the way a system does the thing it was built to do. How long? Marisol said. Just that. Her face had gone very still. Vance checked the tablet, then her watch, comparing the two. Her hand was steady, which was its own particular horror. The package stage is in, she said. From invocation to delivery is 90 minutes by design, to leave a window for an abort if the situation on the ground improves. He invoked it roughly 70 minutes ago. She looked up. We have about 20 minutes, and the abort terminal, the only one tied to this node, is inside that room. 20 minutes. A sealed corridor. A vault full of the things that had taken Greer, standing between us and the one switch that could keep 100,000 people, plus the 5 of us still breathing, from being burned off the district in a single column of fire. This is the part where I'd usually ask what you would do. And I'm going to. But I want you to actually sit in it the way we had to sit in it. 20 minutes on the clock, one abort terminal, behind a vault door full of the things that had just killed our friend. No way out of the perimeter on the surface. Tell me you'd have landed on something better than what we landed on. Because I've turned this over 10,000 times in the years since, and I never have. Vance, it turned out, had one more thing she hadn't told us. And she told it now, because the clock had stripped away the time for anything but the truth. There's a second abort, she said. Not a terminal. A physical interlock, mechanical, separate system. The package is staged out of a hardened locker in a subnode 2 tunnels over, here. She tapped a different point on the schematic, off to the side, away from the red cluster, in a section that was still showing clean, steady blue. It's a continuity of launch failsafe. The kind of thing that exists so that no single point, no single room being lost, can either cause a launch or prevent an abort. There's a manual interlock that can be pulled to scrub the package on the staging side, physically, before it's ever delivered. If we can't get into the node to use the terminal, we go to the source and pull the interlock there. She paused. I can authorize it. My credential is on the authority list for this event. That part's real. But the interlock is a 2-key system. The keys are set 10 feet apart, deliberately, and they have to be turned within 4 seconds of each other, both of them, or it won't accept the scrub. One person can't physically reach both. I need a second pair of hands I can trust, And I need those hands to do exactly what I say at exactly the second I say it. No hesitation. "And the route to this subnode," I said, already hearing where it was going. "Is through the tunnel the infection came up to through," she said. "The breached one, the red one." She didn't soften it by so much as a word. "The clean tunnels are sealed behind blast doors I can't open from this side without the node terminal, which is the thing we can't reach. The only path to the staging subnode that my credential can open from out here runs through the compromised section. We'd be walking straight into the tunnel those things came out of." She looked around the alcove at the five of us, at Pop and Marisol and Tyler and Anita and me, at our small ruined crew in the red light. "I won't lie to you about the odds of that. They're bad. But the alternative is that in 20 minutes, everything inside this perimeter, this corridor, all of us standing in it, the whole avenue and everyone left alive on it, becomes a column of fire. Those are the two options. There aren't any others. I've looked." Pop stood up from his crouch. His knees cracked audibly in the cold, and he winced. And that small, ordinary human sound, an old man's knees, was almost unbearable down there. "My grandkids are in Anacostia," he said. "That's outside this perimeter, outside the box. If this thing gets out of the box, then Vance is right. And they're gone too, them and everyone they know. But if this thing burns inside the box and the perimeter holds, then they're safe. Even if I'm not." He looked at me, and his old eyes in the red light were wet but absolutely steady. "I don't love her math, Daniel. God knows I don't. But I've been listening to it for 10 minutes now, and I think her math is right." That was the thing about Vance's math. It kept being right. And being right, I was learning in that alcove with my arm still aching from holding off a dead friend's teeth, is not the same thing as being good. And the two of them come apart completely the moment there isn't enough time left to make them agree. Reasonable people in a quiet room had written a rule that was right, and the rule was going to burn children. And both of those things were true at once. And the space between them was the whole of what was wrong with that day. I made the decision. I want to own it fully on the record, because it cost exactly what it cost, and I'm the one who set the price. I sent Tyler and Anita back up the stairs, to the lobby, to that security desk with its skinned-over coffee, with one set of instructions. Barricade the stairwell door behind you with whatever's heavy enough. Wait there. And if the foam smell gets strong, or if we're not back in 25 minutes, don't come looking. Get to the highest floor of this building and put as many locked doors as you can between yourselves and the stairs, and pray the perimeter holds." Tyler argued. Of course he did. He was 20, and he was ashamed of the crack in his voice, and the last thing on earth he wanted was to be the one sent up to safety while the rest of us went down into a tunnel. I told him Anita was 16, and somebody had to keep her alive, and that somebody was him. And I watched him take that weight onto his shoulders, watched it settle on him, and watched him age about 5 years in 2 seconds. The way I'd seen happen to young men exactly once before, a long time ago, in a different bad place. He went. They went, up into the dim, and I heard the stairwell door scrape shut, and something heavy drag across it. What I never told Tyler, then or after, is that I sent him up as much to save him as to save the girl. He was 20. He'd already had to stand in a red corridor and watch a man he worked with die on the floor and then come apart into something else. That was enough. That was already more than a 20-year-old should carry. I wasn't going to add the tunnel to it. That left 4 of us for the tunnel. Me. Vance, who knew the way and held the authority and had run out of this exact death an hour ago, and was now choosing to walk back into something worse. Pop. who had closed Greer's eyes and run his grandchildren's math and come out the far side of it steady. And Marisol, who had hit a turning man twice across the skull without 1 second of hesitation, when hesitation would have cost me my throat, and who I would have wanted beside me in any bad place on earth, and who I was about to ask to come into the worst one I'd ever seen. The tunnel access was a blast door set into the wall of the mechanical corridor, directly opposite the vault window and its watching face. Vance's credentials cycled it with a heavy mechanical clunk and a long sigh of equalizing pressure, the door breaking its seal, and the smell that rolled out of it when it cracked folded all 4 of us forward at the waist. The decon foam, yes, that sharp chemical bite. But under it, no longer hidden by it, the rot, the full abattoir reek of the avenue, concentrated and trapped and aged, inside a sealed concrete tube. Marisol gagged and turned her face away and made herself turn it back. The tunnel beyond the door was low and round, a concrete tube barely tall enough to stand in, lit only by red LED strips run along the floor at ankle height, so that everything above the knees was shadow and everything below was lit up in that hellish glow. A crust of dried white foam coated the lower walls like sea salt on a piling. And on the floor, in the foam, there were drag marks, long smears leading away from us into the dark, parallel lines. And I did not let myself think too hard about what made marks like that, about what got dragged. We went in 2 by 2, Marisol and I in front, because we were the ones holding the steel struts and the ones who had already proven on the concrete that we would use them. Vance and Pop close behind, Vance navigating by the tablet's glow held low against her chest, Pop's hand on her shoulder. The blast door sighed shut at our backs and sealed itself with a final, heavy clunk that I felt in my chest. And the only way now was forward, deeper into the dark the things had come from, toward a switch. We hadn't gone 40 feet before we found the first of them. It was on the floor, half buried in a drift of foam, and it had been a tunnel maintenance worker once. You could still tell from the orange coverall, a brighter orange than my own dead vest, and from the heavy boots. It was not moving, and it was not going to move, because the lower half of it was simply not there, ended in a ragged, dark mess just below the ribs. And I understood the drag marks then, all at once. Understood that the things did not stop when they had enough, that there was no enough, that they kept feeding even on the move. And I had to put my free hand flat against the cold, curved concrete wall and breathe through my mouth, slow, in and out, and keep walking. Because the clock on Vance's wrist did not care in the slightest what I had just seen on the floor. The tunnel branched. A junction where our tube met 2 others. A small open chamber with the red floor strips running off in 3 directions into 3 separate dark mouths. Vance directed us left, toward the blue section on her schematic, toward the staging subnode. And at the junction, before we'd taken the left, we all heard them. Ahead of us, down the left branch, the way we needed to go, in the dark. The wet, shuffling drag of feet that didn't lift properly anymore, and the low, sourceless, multi-throated moaning that I have heard in my sleep every few weeks for years now, and expect to hear until I die. Marisol and I stopped. We put our arms back, instinctively, holding Vance and Pop at the junction. Vance checked the tablet, checked her watch against it, and her composure finally cracked. Just at the corner of her mouth, a small tremor she caught and still won't. 14 minutes, she said, and they're between us and the subnode. They're in the only branch that gets us there. We had a choice at that junction, and it was a bad one, and it wasn't really a choice. Go forward into the things, 4 of us with 2 steel struts and no firearms between us, or go back. And going back meant the package delivered on schedule and the avenue burned and the archives burned and Pop's grandkids' whole city gone if the perimeter so much as hiccuped, which perimeters do. There wasn't a choice there. There was only the price of the one path that existed. "How many?" Marisol said, very quietly, her head cocked, listening into the dark of the left branch. "3," I said, listening with her, sorting the moans, trying to count separate sources in the echo. Maybe more behind them. Hard to say with the echo down here. Here is what I learned about the things in that tunnel. And it is the detail that ended up mattering more than anything else. So I'm going to be precise about it. They navigated by sound. On the avenue, in daylight, I'd seen the bitten man turn toward Pop's shouting voice like a compass needle swinging to north, but I'd half put it down to motion, to him seeing us move. In the tunnel, in the dark, with almost no light to see by, it became unmistakable. They were creatures of hearing now, almost entirely. They moved toward noise. They moved toward nothing else, because nothing in their ruined minds was left to tell them to be cautious or afraid, no instinct of self-preservation, no flinch. Which meant noise was at once the thing that would get every one of us killed, and the only tool we had down there worth anything. I took the strut out of Marisol's hands and pressed mine into them in exchange, and I stripped off my high-visibility vest, the orange vest, the stupid, useless badge of my stupid, useless old-world job. The thing that had meant smile and point and please stay behind the line. And I wrapped it tight around the head of the strut so it wouldn't ring quite the same. And I told them my plan in 6 words. Low, fast. I make noise. You go past. Vance started to object, opening her mouth. The interlock. She needed 2 pairs of hands, and I cut her off before she could finish. It needs 4 hands at 2 keys 10 feet apart, turned within 4 seconds, I said. That's you and Marisol. You authorize. She turns the 2nd key on your count. Pop covers your backs at the subnode. I take the things off you, down the right branch, draw them away with the noise, and you 3 walk the left branch clean to the switch. I held her eyes. I'll come behind once they've followed me down the spur. It was a lie, that last part. And I knew it was a lie when I said it. I'll come behind. I had seen the right branch on her schematic over her shoulder at the alcove. Had taken the picture of it the way you take pictures of things when your life depends on the details. The right branch was a maintenance spur, and it was a dead end. It ran maybe 30 feet and terminated at a sealed bulkhead, a heavy wheel valve hatch I would have neither the strength nor the time to crank open. I was going to make a great deal of noise, deliberately, at the closed end of a dead-end tube, with 3 or more of those things between me and the only way out of it. I knew that completely when I said I'll come behind, and I said it anyway. I said it because Pop had 2 grandchildren asleep tonight in Anacostia, who would wake up tomorrow in a city or wouldn't. And because Marisol was 26 and had hit a man twice to save my throat and deserved to be 27. And because Vance was the only one whose credential could authorize the scrub. And because the math, Vance's terrible, relentless correct math, said that one of us had to be the noise. And I was 47 and the supervisor. And these were my people, and it was my call to make. The man who happens to be standing in the part of the math that costs the most doesn't get to hand it to someone younger just because his back hurts. Marisol looked at me. She had done enough of her own math that day to read mine the moment I laid it out. And I watched her get to the end of it, watched her arrive at the dead end on the schematic in her own head, and understand exactly what I'll come behind meant. She didn't argue. That was the kindest and the hardest thing she could have done. And it was both at once. And I have loved her for it in a particular quiet way ever since. The way you love the one person who let you keep your dignity in the worst moment of your life by not making you say the true thing out loud. She just said my name once. Reyes. Go when they pass the junction, I said. Don't stop for anything. Don't look back down the spur. Hit the window on the count. And that was the whole of the goodbye. There wasn't time for more, and more would only have made it harder for both of us, and we both knew that too. I want to say something here, to you, before I tell you how it went, because there isn't going to be a clean place for it after. If you've come with me this far, all the way down into this tunnel, into the red and the foam and the dark, thank you for staying. I don't tell this part of it for sympathy, and I'd ask you not to give me any. I tell it because somebody outside the four of us should know what those people on the avenue were worth, and what it actually cost to keep the rest of the city from joining them in the box. And because I've spent a very long time turning over whether I made the right call at that junction, and I would genuinely like to know what you think when you've heard all of it. So hold your verdict until the end. Let me finish first. I went forward, alone, down the right branch into the dark, and I started banging the strut against the curved concrete wall, hard, deliberate, a steady ringing rhythm, and I started to shout. I shouted my own name. I have never fully understood why. I've turned that over too. The best I've come to is that it seemed important, in that moment, that the last loud thing I did in this world was claim it. That Daniel Reyes had stood here, in this tube, and made this noise, on purpose, by choice, and not been dragged into the dark mute and surprised the way the man in the orange coverall had been. The moaning ahead of me in the spur changed the instant I started. It focused. It turned, the way the needle turns. And I heard them start to move toward me, fast now. The wet drag becoming a wet rush, the patience gone out of them, and pure motion poured in. And I backed deeper down the dead-end spur, ringing that strut off the walls like a bell, calling them to dinner, drawing them after me, away from the junction. And out of the very corner of my eye, in the low red glow, I saw shapes pour past the mouth of the junction after me. 1, 2, 3, and then a fourth coming behind, all of them turning down the spur toward the noise, toward me. And behind them, on the far side of the junction, blessedly, in the same red glow, I saw Marisol and Pop and Vance break the other way, fast and low, down the left branch, toward the blue, toward the sub-node and the interlock and the switch, exactly as I'd needed them to. The spur was maybe 30 feet long, and it ended exactly where the schematic had promised, at a sealed bulkhead with a heavy wheel valve at its center, a door I had no time and no strength to open. I put my back against the cold steel of it. I had the strut with my dead vest wrapped around the head of it, and I had 4 of them coming down a tube I couldn't leave. And I made my peace with the math faster than I would ever have believed a man could. Because here is the truth about it that no one tells you. Once you have actually decided, the deciding is the entire hard part, and everything after the decision is just the body doing what the decision has already required of it. The fear I'd expected didn't come, or it came and went past me like the moaning did, focused somewhere else. What I felt, mostly with my back against that bulkhead, was a strange flat clarity, and a single thought running underneath everything, which was the interlock, the keys, the 4 seconds, the count. Did they make it? Is the avenue going to burn anyway and make all of this nothing? It didn't burn. I know that now, because I'm here telling you this, which I'll explain, I promise. But you have to understand that I did not know it then. In the spur, with my back to the bulkhead and the 4 of them closing the last of the 30 feet, I went into it fully believing it had probably been for nothing, that I'd likely bought Vance 14 minutes, that the things already inside the node had spent for her, that the count would be missed, or the keys wouldn't turn, or some last protocol I didn't know about would override the scrub, and that the whole avenue would go up regardless and take me with it as a footnote. And that is the truth about most sacrifices, the part that the stories leave out. You make them blind. You don't get to see the scoreboard. You don't get the warm certainty that it worked, that it counted, that you bought what you meant to buy. Whatever you decide at the end about whether I chose right at that junction, decide it knowing that I didn't get the comfort of knowing, going in, that it would. Nobody who matters ever does. I'm not going to narrate the fight in the spur. There are things I will not turn into entertainment. And a man swinging a steel strut at the dark, at the closed end of a tube, is one of them. I'll tell you only what's necessary, which is that I lasted longer than I'd have guessed. That the first one I put down hard, with a swing that caught it across the temple, and the second I put down with the butt end driven up under its jaw. And that the third got an arm around me before I'd recovered from the second. And the bulkhead was at my back. And there was no give left, nowhere to step. And the strut was pinned between us, useless. And the last clear thought I had before the noise of my own breathing filled up everything I could hear was about the interlock again. About whether they'd hit the 4 seconds. About whether it had mattered. About whether the city was still going to be there in the morning for Pop's grandkids to wake up in. It was. Here is what happened on the far side of the junction, in the left branch, at the sub-node, which I pieced together later from Marisol and from Vance, and from the thin official record that ever got written down about that day. They reached the staging sub-node with about 90 seconds left on the clock. The branch had been clear, the way I'd drawn them off it, and they ran it. The sub-node was a small, hardened chamber, a hardened locker on one wall and the interlock console set into the other. And the 2 keys exactly as Vance had described, 10 feet apart, a deliberate distance, set there by careful people who'd wanted to be sure no single person and no single panic could ever do this thing alone. Vance authorized the scrub at the console with her credential, her name on the list proving real after all. Pop took the first key, because Pop's hands were the steadiest of the 3 of them, steadier than Marisol's, steadier even than Vance's by then. Marisol took the second key, 10 feet down the console, and Vance counted them in, 3, 2, 1, and on her count they turned, both of them, together. And they hit the 4-second window, and the manual mechanical interlock scrubbed the thermobaric package on the staging side 90 seconds before it would have delivered to the sealed zone. The avenue did not burn. The 100,000 did not all die in a single column of fire over the National Mall. A great many of them died, anyway. I will not soften that. From the infection and from the crush and from the long, terrible hours of the lockdown, before perimeter operation finally went through the sealed zone block by block 3 days later, brute force room by room, doing the grim arithmetic with rifles that the protocol had wanted to do with fire. But the city stood. The metro tunnels stayed clean. The thing never got out of the box. Anacostia stayed clean, and Hyattsville stayed clean. And Pop's grandchildren woke up the next morning in a city, never knowing how close it had come, which is the entire point of the kind of work that nobody ever thanks anybody for, the work that succeeds by leaving no trace of the catastrophe it prevented. The protocol that had so nearly burned them all was quietly revised in the months after. Vance saw to that personally, and it cost her most of what was left of her career. And she let it cost her that, which tells you the rest of what I came to think of her in the end. And me. The third one in the spur, the one that got its arm around me with my back to the bulkhead, didn't bite me. I will never fully know why, except that when it bore me down, and the strut pinned uselessly between us, the head of it, the end I'd wrapped my vest around, came up under its jaw the way my own forearm had come up under Greer's in the corridor. And we were locked there an instant, straining, and the foam-slick floor took the both of us sideways, hard, into the wheel valve of the bulkhead. And the metal hub of that valve did to the side of its skull what Marisol's strut had done to Greer's. It went slack on top of me. The fourth one, the one that had come in behind, I will be honest with you, I do not remember clearly. There is a gap there, a black place in the 4 seconds, and the next thing I have is the silence, and the weight on top of me, and the realization that nothing else was moving in the spur. I came out from under it, with my arms shaking too hard to keep hold of the strut, and it rang on the concrete when it fell, and I flinched at my own noise out of pure animal habit before I remembered there was nothing left down the spur to hear it. 3 of them down. The 4th down somewhere in the black place I don't remember. And not one bite on me. And I checked. There in the dark, ran my hands over both arms, my neck, my face, the way you check the thing you cannot afford to be wrong about. And there was nothing. And I have never once in all the years since called that luck, because luck is the wrong word, far too small a word, for outliving people who are better than you, for no reason that you will ever be able to name. I sat on the floor of that dead-end spur, in the red light, with the bodies, for longer than I should have. I don't know how long. Long enough to be sure my arms would hold me. Long enough to listen, hard, into the dark of the junction, and be certain nothing else was coming. The decon foam and the rot were the only smell in the world. And I understood, sitting there, that they were going to be the smell of the rest of my life. That some doors never fully close once they've been opened. And then I made myself get up, one hand on the cold bulkhead, and I walked back up the spur to the junction, past the things on the floor, not looking down at them. And the junction was empty, and the left branch was open and clear because they'd made it, because the scrub had held, because the deciding had been the hard part and the math had been right, and right is not the same as good, and I knew that now. Not as an idea, but in my body, in the shaking of my own arms, the way you only ever learn a thing like that once. I found Marisol and Pop and Vance at the staging subnode, and Marisol turned and saw me come up out of the dark of the junction alive. And she made a sound I'm not going to describe to you, because it was hers, and it belongs to her. Pop crossed the chamber and put one hand on the back of my neck and held it there, hard, the way you do with someone you have decided to keep, someone you are not going to let go of again. And he didn't say anything either. And Vance stood at the console with her tablet still hugged against her chest and the scrubbed package showing a steady green on the screen behind her. And she looked at me for a long moment. And then she said the only thing she ever said to me in all of it that sounded anything like an apology. "I'm sorry about your man in the corridor," she said. "The math doesn't forgive that part. It's not supposed to. It doesn't, and it never has. Greer had 2 kids in middle school in Hyattsville, a boy and a girl whose school photos he kept behind his ID. And I shoved him into a corridor wall, and Marisol hit him twice across the skull. And the 4 of us left his body lying on cold concrete in a federal sub-basement, and went on down into a tunnel to save a city that will never once learn his name. I have made my peace with almost all of that. The almost is the part I carry, and I expect to carry it the rest of the way. And I've stopped wishing I didn't, because a man who could set that down clean was never a man worth standing next to in a bad place to begin with. We got Tyler and Anita out 3 days later, when the perimeter operation finally reached our building and worked up through it floor by floor, and found the two of them barricaded into a supply room on the top floor, dehydrated, half mad with waiting, alive. Anita's family had made it. They'd been swept out in an early evacuation off the western end of the avenue before the worst of it. And 3 days later, I stood at a fenced processing center out in Maryland and watched a 16-year-old girl in a sunflower sundress fall into her mother's arms, the both of them folding down onto the asphalt together. And I thought, with a clarity that has never left me, that's the scoreboard. That one, right there. That is what it was all for. Not the city, not the protocol, not the column of fire that didn't come. That one girl and her mother on the asphalt. Tyler kept the security job for exactly 2 more months and then quit and went back to school for nursing. And I think that's the rightest decision anyone made that whole year. And I told him so. And I meant it. Pop retired for good, to Anacostia, to those grandkids. And I get a text from him every 4th of July, the same 3 words, every single year. Still here, brother. I write back the same 3 words. Still here, brother. We don't say more than that. We've never needed to. Those 3 words hold all of it. Vance and I don't speak, and that isn't bitterness. And I want to be clear about it. It's that we each know too much of the exact same thing, carry the exact same weight from the exact same hour. And there is no conversation that survives that. Nothing 2 people can say to each other across that particular shared dark that doesn't make it heavier for the saying. The last I heard of her, she was somewhere quiet, having turned down every promotion they tried to hand her, doing the slow, patient, unglamorous work of rewriting the protocols so that the next decision authority, in the next sealed room on the next national holiday, has to look harder and longer at the math before he reaches for the fire. Has to be made to see the avenue before he can burn it. I hope she finishes it. I hope to God nobody ever has to find out whether it worked. Because the only kind of victory that work ever earns is the kind that leaves no trace. The catastrophe that didn't happen. The morning the grandkids woke up in a city and never knew why they almost hadn't. People ask me, the very few who know any of this, whether I would do it again. The junction, the dead-end spur, the noise. And I never answer them, because the question assumes I had a self in that moment that was standing back and weighing options, choosing the noble thing over the safe thing. And the truth is smaller and harder and stranger than that. There wasn't a choice in that junction, not really. There was only the math, and the math had a shape, and the shape of it had one loud man standing in a dead end so that 3 quiet people could reach a switch. And I happened to be the one standing in the place where the loud man went. That's all heroism ever is, I think. When you get down close enough to actually look at it. It isn't courage, or not only courage. It's being the one who happens to be standing in the part of the math that costs the most, and then not stepping out of it when you still could have. That's the whole of it. The rest is just the body doing what's been decided. The parade on Constitution Avenue is still held every year. They rebuilt the route and revised the protocols and added a dozen quiet safeguards that no one in the crowd will ever see or know to thank anyone for. And the crowds came back. The way crowds always come back. Because people need to stand together out in the open on a bright day and believe, for an afternoon, that the day is only a day. I went back once after. I stood at the corner of 7th and Constitution, right where the Eagle float had jammed sideways across the route, on a clean morning with a clean crowd. And I listened to a high school marching band come around the corner by the archives, with the brass catching the light in those same hard white flashes. And for one full minute, it was just a day. An ordinary, bright American day. And 100,000 people clapped along to the drums like the world wasn't quietly tilting under them. And then, a small child near me dropped an ice cream cone onto the hot pavement and screamed the way small children scream. The outraged, world-ending, entirely happy way. And a dozen heads near me turned toward the sound, the way the needle turns toward north. All at once, that synchronized animal swivel. And I felt the cold drop go all the way down through the soles of my shoes into the pavement again. And I had to reach out and put my hand flat against the cool granite of the archives wall and breathe slow through my mouth, in and out, until the world finished coming back. It always comes back. That's the part nobody tells you, the part I'll leave you with. The world comes back, and you stand in it, and you carry the names the city will never learn. And you write 3 words to an old man in Anacostia once a year, and he writes the same 3 back. And you check your own arms for bites that aren't there, sometimes in the dark, without quite meaning to. The world comes back, and you stand in it. That's the whole of what survival turns out to be in the end. Not a triumph, a standing. If you've come all this way with me, into the spur and back out of it, I'd genuinely like to know what you think. In that junction, with 14 minutes and 1 switch and 3 of them coming down the dark, do you believe I made the right call? Or do you think there was a way out of it that I was too tired or too frightened or too sure of my own math to see? I have had years now to decide, and I still go back and forth. Some nights one way and some nights the other. And wherever you are listening to this from tonight, whatever city or town is quiet around you while you do, I hope it stays that way. I hope it stays just a day. For you, all your days. And I hope you never have to learn the difference between right and good, the way the 4 of us learned it. Down in the red light, with the foam on the floor and the clock running out, and a friend behind us on the cold concrete. Stay with the channel, if these are your kind of story. There are others. There are always others. And someone has to tell them. And someone has to listen. Still here.